welcome to this interview session with Kate Fletcher. She is an icon and a thought leader in the field of sustainable fashion. She is the most cited scholar in fashion and sustainability, and her work both defines and challenges the field. She is a professor at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion at the London College of Fashion. She has led innumerable innovative design research projects and has written and edited 9 books available in 7 languages, including Sustainable Fashion and Textiles, Design Journeys, which is widely regarded as the field's classic text. Her latest work is about fashion and nature, and I'm looking forward to learning more about that. Welcome, Kate.
Hello, thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. I would love to jump in with a question that builds a little bit on the wealth of experience you have built up over the years. And as I said in the intro, your work has helped define and shape the narrative around sustainability in fashion. Today is our Circularity Day, and I'm wondering how you think about the potential shift in narrative and focus on circularity as opposed to sustainability.
Oh, that's such a cracker of a question to open with, and I suppose it touches on many things that people are both aware of and maybe an emerging discourse around these ideas. So for me, circularity is a structured strategy that fits within a bigger discourse of a transformational shift towards sustainability. And many of the hallmarks or characteristics of circularity are ones that we've seen in many of the strategies that people have been employing or trying out for 30 years. And these are all strategies that try to look to increase the resourcefulness or materials efficiency of the system at large. And most of the people who've been trying these things out are people within industry, and they've largely been directing this towards their supply chain. So they've been doing things like substituting a high impact material or removing that and substituting a lower impact material for that. They've been replacing dye chemicals that are harmful and toxic with other ones. And through the supply chain, we've seen that people have been trying to increase things like transparency in order to allow for greater accountability. And then the things we know about recycling and upcycling. And to a certain extent, in the way that I understand it, circularity is an inevitable sort of coming together of those two latter things. It's a description of a system that tries to hold and value the materials within it for as long as possible. And what circularity is doing is the same thing that recycling and upcycling schemes have been trying to do for a long time, which is basically to keep things in circulation, to try to hold the value of those things at the highest level for as long as possible. That it's now been branded as circularity is another question, and perhaps there's lots to discuss about whether that's the right thing. But certainly one of the things that I would really say is that circularity is largely what we would describe as a techno fix. It's requiring and leaning on technology in order to fix it. And yet the fundamentals of this challenge that we face at the moment with climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality, these things are not technical problems alone. And actually, by only relying on a techno fix like circularity, we risk not really dealing with the fundamental challenge ahead of us, which actually I think what we know is sustainability is a movement that's concerned with people. And we need to start recognizing this as a softer thing as well, not only something that's driven by an approach to trying to close cycles, which actually at the moment we don't have any technology to deliver that fully. And on top of that, many of the ideas that are linked within the circularity movement are very much tied to what I would call a growth logic, a logic of economic growth, which obviously is the thing that's up to this point been tripping us up in terms of progress. It's been preventing progress really being delivered because it just keeps on coming back to this idea that we have to continue growing in order to stay a viable system in terms of an economic system. And that's not possible within a finite planet.
Right, thank you. That was so well described by you. So just to paraphrase, on the one hand, perhaps circularity and the measures being put in place now offers a path to implementing some ideas about sustainability and sustainable production, but falls short on the social and cultural level. How do you think that the sort of social and cultural movement needed can be fostered and help grow, especially with this current focus on the more economic side of the discussion?
So this challenge, this balance between the techno-economic angle and then other questions, has been something that I think has been grappled with, for many years, certainly within the Brooklyn Report's definition of sustainable development. There was an attempt to bridge that and to bring that together, but that's been echoed through time at various UN conferences with different groups saying, hang on a minute, but we're understanding this differently. And I think it comes back down to the theories of change. So we have to begin to really say to ourselves, what do we believe we have to do in order to affect change? Where can change begin? Who holds responsibility? And underpinning this sort of challenge that you sort of argue between these two sides, I think that there are effectively different philosophical approaches or different stances on change and what the environment is. So one holds on to a faith in technology and managerial ingenuity and science to fix it. And the other recognises that actually what we need to do instead is we need to begin to reimagine the structures and the organisations that shape our lives, and we need to begin to change behaviours and think differently and use imagination really grounded in the reality of our world to think differently.
So perhaps one could say that looking at some of the social movements coming forth, Gen Z-driven social movements like Fridays for Future or Extinction Rebellion and new forms of activism growing around that, could be a sort of promising sign of that consciousness for change and readiness to change on an individual level. But it's very hard to see that on a industrial level. Where do you think the pressure points can be to create that shift and not just have this be something where the responsibility is always at the individual level?
I would agree that holding responsibility alone at an individual level is insufficient. This obviously has to be linked together in so many different ways. One of the hallmarks that we've seen of the fashion and sustainability movement over the last 30 years has been an attempt to deflect responsibility from one group onto another group. That's been like the characteristic. So you have organic cotton manufacturers saying, oh, the most impact is with consumers, and then other people say, oh, no, the most impacted. So there's an attempt to sort of shift the burden the whole time. But what I take from movements like Fridays for Future or XR are the appetite that people have to begin to recognise that they have interest and purpose, but also that they're beginning to recognise their power within the system that we live in. But I think one of the things that, in terms of business and other industry opportunities that we're beginning to see, is that going forward, there will be plenty of opportunities for people who are interested in staying in some sort of industrial configuration within this space. There will be so many opportunities, but they will be opportunities that are configured differently, that start from a different point, not from an extension of business as usual going forward, but a bit greener. Not that point. A point where we've leapt forward and said, well, what does our earth need? And what are the opportunities for fashion within that? Not thinking, what are the sustainability opportunities here that we're doing today? But this other thing, what does the earth need fashion to do? And sometimes that might be less, and sometimes that means, oh, no, not that at all, but configured completely differently. So I think what we're going to see is the opportunities for industry going forward, and where the tipping points will come from this change is where people begin to see the massive opportunities that there will be when they're beginning to explore what the earth needs and thinking, what is fashion there? That's where the change will come. And increasingly, from numerous conversations, people I mean, even 10 years ago would have said, you can't do that. That's a bit crazy. That's a bit illogical. And now what they're saying is to not act is the thing that's illogical and not in favour of their long-term business interests. There's a sort of a shift.
Yeah, wow. And I think it's obviously also people like yourself who are showing these opportunities and trying to spread the word about this vision, which is an incredibly creative and innovative one as well, and definitely not one that just sort of looks at the keeping of the status quo, but really of how to reinvent and reshape. Can you talk us through a little bit about how you're trying to do that in your personal work, but perhaps also with the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion? Is that a group of people you've gathered to also try to push ideas like that forward, and how do you try to influence?
So the union specifically I'm a co-founder of that with many other colleagues, and that's a group of people who've come together who are extremely frustrated at the slow pace of change, but also the way that research isn't being used in a lively way to begin to be implemented and acted upon immediately. There's such a delay between the way that research is used, but also often people are researching the same ideas over and over again, rather than being able to move forward at pace, because we all know that we need to work quicker to affect change in this area, in these climate change times. So the union now has 226 members in about 50 countries around the world. And these are people, these are practitioners and researchers, people who are really engaging with an agenda that's saying, actually, what we need to do is to call out economic growth logic as a problem and begin to explore what the alternatives are. In a typical sort of way, what happens when you begin to question the dominant status quo, you're almost pushed to the edges. But what collective action like that in the union has allowed us to do is to form and build together. So actually we are not individuals any longer scattered across universities around the world, but a really engaging and dynamic and creative, powerful force. And this has led to many people both feeling supported and also our collective voices amplified as a result. So it's been, I mean, you know, the act of coming together is hard work and remarkable.
Fantastic.
Oh, and then you asked me, sorry, what
Please.
was your other? Do you ask me about something else?
Oh no, I think you answered it very well. Like how this work takes shape, and also how you're trying to take influence. But this idea of amplifying each other's voices and being more than sort of the sum of the parts of the individuals coming together, I think you expressed very well. Maybe to close with, you can share a little bit about your latest publication and this idea of putting Earth first, or this Earth logic, as you describe it.
Absolutely. So Earth Logic is a collaboration that's between myself and Professor Matilda Tam from Linnaeus University in Sweden. And it's free to download at earthlogic.info. And it's a report that tries to put a new logic forward. It replaces the logic of economic growth with Earth logic, and it unfolds what this is for fashion. And it's a very radical document, and it outlines 6, we call them landscapes, so they're sort of like terrains or territories which we think fashion can go and inhabit and live and explore and cultivate. And this is the work where we begin to jump forward over all of the sorts of efficiency tweaks that people have been trying to do for a long time, and we move into the terrain where we think big things will happen. And one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're working inspired by gardening and the principles of gardening to figure out how can we cultivate these territories? How can we move ideas from action? How can we begin to grow the sorts of work that we want to see? And so in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be releasing the next phase of the Earth Logic work, which is called Earth Logic Gardening, where the principles and practices of gardening are being really transposed onto fashion to give us a gentle type of governance of what we want to see and how to begin to cultivate change.
That sounds incredible. I love gardening and fashion, and I can't wait to dig into that and highly encourage all of our viewers to do the same. Thank you so much, Kate, for being here with us today and for sharing your thoughts. It was wonderful to listen to them, and all the best for that next stage of Earth Logic.
You're welcome. Thank you.